wanted to discuss this photograph a little bit. I think this is just a fantastic record of the time. This is taken in 1914, and this is the wedding of Timothy J. Dwyer and Susan Flanagan. Their numbers 24 and 25. This was the joining of two very important families in the early days of Omaha. And I think it says a lot about the time, particularly it says a lot about the sort of Catholic hierarchy of Omaha at the time, particularly the Irish Catholic hierarchy at the time. I just wanted to sort of go through and discuss some of these people and their interrelationships, which is a little easier to do in this forum than, say, looking through each person on Ancestry or so forth, because I think the important thing here is understanding how these people interacted with each other and what I'm still trying to discover. So let's start here at the far lower right of the photograph, numbers 31 and 32. This is John and Nora, or officially listed as Honoria, but I believe the family called her Nora Flanagan. This is the patriarch and matriarch of the Flanagan family that moved from Ireland and settled in Omaha. They were in New York City for a short time thereafter, and some of their older adult children, actually most were adults, only one was child, which is Michael, who's number one on the far left. Some stayed in Ireland for some years afterwards, but the majority of the family moved to the United States, mostly to follow Patrick, who is number 19 on the photograph. Patrick, who had been assigned to the Archdiocese of Omaha at the time as part of the growing Catholic population in the American West at that time. You have to understand, Omaha at this time was a rapidly expanding city of immigrants of all types. It was ideally located on the Missouri River, so that it was a place where the Western cattlemen would bring their animals into market. So there was the pack houses, the Kudhay packing house was a major concern at the time. It was also a city that was undergoing rapid industrialization at the time, and also, the local farm economy was huge. Access to rail and river traffic was very important. So it was a real economic center, and it was growing rapidly. I believe the population doubled in 10 years. So this is 1914, and John and Nora, their story is fairly well documented in some of the other books, particularly the more recent book by Father Clifford Stevens from Boys Town Press. And then directly over them, number 22, is Edward Joseph Flanagan, E.J. Flanagan, or just Father Flanagan, as he is known, who would become the founder of Boys Town. At this time, however, in 1914, he was basically, he was still becoming a leader in Omaha. He had taken significant steps on that path in the last year. Omaha in 1913 suffered two horrific events. One was a tornado that ripped through Omaha, and another was a drought, and that the farming communities surrounding Omaha suffered greatly, and this caused other suffering within the city. Father Flanagan became a real leader in not only finding shelter for homeless individuals in the drought and in the aftermath of the tornado, but he also did a lot of community service. He helped pick up the bodies, all that kind of stuff, and was seen as a real leader, a young leader at the time. So let's move on now a little bit to the Dwyer family. Tim Dwyer is number 24 here, and then his brother, who was the best man, number 27, Jack. These two brothers had moved to Omaha from O'Neill, Nebraska. O'Neill, Nebraska is northwest of Omaha, directly west of Sioux City. It looks like a few hundred miles away. The brothers grew up there. Their father was one of the original founders of O'Neill, Nebraska, but that was their father's second act. Their father, who was born in Ireland in the 1840s, actually moved to the United States to northern Michigan near the Keweenaw Peninsula to be one of the first colonists of Michigan and one of the founders of the Michigan copper mining industry in the UP of Michigan in the days right around the beginning of the Civil War. So their father, John Sr., worked in the mining industry, was very successful, but then moved out of northern Michigan, around the turn of the century, around 1900, and then moved to O'Neill and was one of the founders of O'Neill. So they are a very successful family. There were many other Dwyer children, some of which may be in this photograph, and I don't know who they are necessarily. I believe number 11, directly behind Timothy, I think that is his mother, whose maiden name was Sullivan, also born in Ireland, I think, but we're not 100% certain on that. Her name, that would be Mary O'Sullivan, Mary Cromhoom O'Sullivan, I think mother of the groom. Anyway, so like I said, there are some other Flanagans in this photograph, besides Father P.A. Flanagan there, who is number 19. And on the far left is Michael Flanagan. Michael Flanagan, the youngest of the original Flanagan family. He tragically passed away in 1930, and Michael was a very skilled and gifted singer. Other Flanagan members who are seen in this photograph, who I believe are seen in this photograph, of course, Father P.A., number 19, and at this time in 1914, he would have been just a few years into the founding of Holy Angels Parish on the north side, and I believe that he was building the cathedral on Fowler at that time. Unfortunately, that church would be torn down in 1979 to make way for an expressway. Number 18, now I'm not 100% certain, but I believe this is Nellie Flanagan. I think there's a chance it may also be Lucy Mallory. I'm trying to get verification on this, but if it's Nellie Flanagan, Nellie was Father E.J. Flanagan's right-hand assistant throughout his life. She also helped run Boys Town with him and was really an equal force in terms of organizing the day-to-day operation of Boys Town. At this time, she had helped him set up the first hotel for the homeless, which I believe was an active project they would have had when this photograph was taken in early January of 1914. Moving on to other Flanagans, over on the far left, of course, is Michael Flanagan. Michael Flanagan, the youngest of the original Flanagan family, was the only one who was truly a child when they moved to the United States. He was sent to a boarding school in a nearby town outside of Omaha, um, and later settled in Omaha and became quite successful, although he died tragically in 1930. Next to Michael is a particular focus of mine. This is James Flanagan. James Flanagan is the brother in between Patrick and EJ of the three older Flanagan brothers. When your older and younger brothers are both priests, you probably have a lot to live up to. And I think James struggled with that. He went back in Ireland. He helped his father quite a bit in the farming on the estate they managed in Ireland, and cutting peat and so forth, which they did for a living there. When they got to Omaha, James found a job as a steam fitter. When they originally moved from Omaha when they moved to Omaha, I believe in 1907 or 1906, when they first arrived after being in New York for, I think, up to a year. They took up residence in this home at 1504 South 29th Street. The home still exists to this day. Anyway, they all moved in there, and when they got here, they found jobs in various professions. Of course, Father Patrick was already a pastor. I believe some of the young women found jobs as stenographers or office jobs. I know that Father EJ actually worked as an accountant at the Kudhe Packaging Corporation. And James here, number 2 on the photograph, found a job as a steam fitter. The write-up of the wedding is in the January 7th edition of the Omaha Bee, and really goes into great detail about the event, and names lots of people who I mentioned were in the photograph, including Richard Scannell, the Archbishop, Father J.J. Jeanette of St. Joseph's Hospital. Also discusses the Mass being performed by not only the Father P.A. Flanagan and E.J. Flanagan, but with several of the other Catholic priests involved in the ceremony. It describes some of the Mallorys who were also in attendance. So also it mentions Miss Winifred Trainer, who was the organist and was really quite a famous organist at the time, and she would go on to marry young Michael Flanagan, who was in the photograph. So he married a more mature woman, but it was the music that put them together, I'm certain. Anyway, this is a fascinating article, and it also goes on to say that there were over 3,000 people invited to the wedding. Now, it doesn't say how many attended, but we know that the church where the wedding took place cannot hold anywhere near 3,000 folks. It can only hold, about 600. And that there was a later reception at a local hotel. But the photograph was taken at the house on California Avenue, and that was specifically after the wedding breakfast, which was a smaller group. James would go on to have a variety of different jobs throughout his life, working for grocery distributors and selling insurance and some other interesting positions. He was married twice and widowed both times, having 9 children by both women, both Irene, who is in this photograph, and Maud, who he would marry a year after Irene's passing. So this is an early plat of that area. This would be California Street. This would be the original Crichton College in Omaha. The home where the photograph was taken. The photograph was taken um, facing the camera is looking to the east on California. That would make the home on the north side of this street. So it would be probably one of these homes. I believe I've nailed it to. I thought it was at once on the corner, but I think perhaps it's one of these. This was called Lincoln Boulevard, and that no longer exists right now. Essentially, the area from the old Lincoln Boulevard, over into part of this Creighton College area has all been torn up for the expressway. So, so much history was torn up by the expressway construction. We have another photograph taken the same morning during the photo sessions. It looks like they're posing on the neighbor's front walk as the wedding party members appear to be milling about on the front porch. It must have been a lovely, sunny, bright day in early January. Here we have the best man Jack, groom TJ, Susan, and Delia. So a couple of other folks in this photograph. Now, number 6, this man in number 6, I don't know who this is. He has a very distinctive face, I believe a Catholic priest, and he is also seen in a couple of other photographs that I have of that day, but I haven't been able to place him. Now, it's fair to say that if you look at this photograph, there's an overwhelming number of men and only a few women. Now, some people have commented, well, that's because the women were in cleaning the dishes or taking care of the meal, and some of that is probably largely true. Also, there are an enormous number of Catholic priests in this photograph, and typically they don't bring dates. So that's probably why the photograph is overwhelmingly men. However, I have not been able to place all of the women in the photograph. Now, number 7, I believe this is I believe this is Bishop Richard Scanlon, who was a very important figure at the time. Obviously, the head of the Church of Omaha. He was also instrumental in helping out young E.J. Flanagan start with the first hotel for homeless men from both the drought and the tornado, and was also instrumental in getting his whole charitable enterprise that would someday become Boys Town underway. And the reason I know a lot of these priests were here is because there was a story in the Omaha Bee about the wedding, and specifically the wedding breakfast. I believe this was taken after the wedding breakfast, and they named several officials, Catholic officials, who were present at that particular at this event. So here you see Archbishop Scannell. He was there. Also, John Jeanette was there. Now, he was with St. Joseph Hospital, and I believe that he is likely the boss of Timothy Dwyer Jr., and likely that's where Susan Flanagan worked as a nurse, but I don't have any verification of that. So there were some other Catholic priests there, James Stenson from St. Philomena's, and Father McCarthy from St. Peter's Church. Of course, the others on this sheet are also well known: P.A. Flanagan, Dr. Timothy Dwyer, and Father E.J. Flanagan. Now I want to talk about another group of people who are in this photograph, the Mallorys. Now, I spoke a little bit already about James here, number 2, and his wife, Irene. James and Irene would be married in 1910, so just about 3.5 years before this photo was taken. And at this time, they had 2 children, young Frances, who would go on to be a nun and live a very long life, and Susan Mary Flanagan, named after her aunt Susan, who is the bride here. Susan Mary Flanagan, unfortunately, would go on to um, die as a young woman in New York City in 1939. But at this time, this was still a young marriage. Now, they would have they would have three more children, but in late 1919, Irene would become ill, I believe with tuberculosis, and James and Irene would move the family down to Kerrville, Texas, where they would go for the arid environment, which was known to be more healthy at the time. Um, anyway, more about them later. But Irene's father is number 30 here, Charles Mallory. Now, Charles became very close to the Flanagan family. Um, his wife, Fanny, had passed away just 2 years before. Charles came from a small town called Paola, Kansas. About 100 or 200 miles or so south of Kansas City. Charles was in the Civil War as a young man, an infantryman from Illinois. After the war, he went into the hardware business, became a very successful businessman and real estate developer, and was one of the town founders, the real leaders of the budding town of Paola, Kansas. And once again, during this time of rapid population expansion, he did very, very well. Built a substantial building in Paola, Kansas called the Opera House, which was a very important performance venue. Lots of national touring acts would come through there. Anyway, that was later the subject of a horrific fire and an insurance claim and some scandalous allegations about fraud that would later ensnare his daughter Lucy, but she would escape from it all very well, and she would go on to New York City herself. Anyway, so Charles, this was in 1914. Like I said, Fanny had passed away 2 years prior. His daughter Irene had married into the Flanagan family, and Lucy was also an aunt and very close to her two nieces at the time. I thought for a while this was not Nellie Flanagan, but this was Lucy Mallory, and I'm not sure. Now, Lucy is known to be at this event. She is a listed person at the event. Now, she had dark hair. That's what I know, and I have one other photograph of her in later years, so it's hard to say because this could be Nellie or it could be Lucy. Anyway, Lucy was at the event. It is documented in the Omaha Bee that she was there and she was at this particular breakfast. So the other likely candidate for Lucy, I think, might be number 12 here, but I'm really uncertain about that. Like I said, I think that behind Timothy here is his mother, Mary Catherine. I'm not certain if his father is in the photograph. Now, number 4 and number 23 confused me quite a bit because obviously they both look to be Catholic priests, but I couldn't place them based on the other photographs. And I couldn't seem to place Timothy's best man, who was a man named Milton Murphy, and was, I'm not certain what Milton Murphy looked like, but he had traveled to Omaha from Utah for the wedding. I believe number 15, and I believe number 15 could be Father J.F. McCarthy of St. Peter's Church, and I believe number 16, quite prominent behind the bride and bridesmaid there, I believe that is Father John Jenrette of St. Joseph Hospital. Another clue about the attendees of the wedding might come from this article, or short notice rather, that was in the Omaha Bee the day before the wedding. Now, it seems sort of like a story about a bachelor party, but I don't know if they had bachelor parties in those days. But it was held at a place called the Omaha Club. I don't know much about the Omaha Club, but looks like it had some important people. So these people, they elected Dr. Dwyer to be something called a Benedict, which I believe is some sort of honor at the Omaha Club. So if you look at the people who are involved here, one of them who actually spoke was Mayor Dahlman. I believe he was also known as Mayor Jim Cowboy Dahlman, who was a famously corrupt mayor, I understand, in the early machine politics of Omaha. So obviously you had some high-placed people here speaking or supporting Dr. Dwyer, included the chief of police and several other distinguished early Omaha residents. Of Timothy and Susan, they would go on to have some children, the first of which tragically would pass away, at the end of the same year that the wedding photo was taken. Timothy J. Dwyer Jr. would die shortly after birth. They had a daughter, Susan, in 1916, followed by Catherine in 1918. And they had another son who they also named Timothy Dwyer, who was born in 1924. And then they had another son who also passed away at the age of 2 in 1925. Also around 1925, that's when Timothy's parents passed away, I believe in 1924 and 1925 respectively, in O'Neill. Timothy and Susan would then relocate out to Santa Barbara, California, and begin a life out there. However, in 1928, Timothy suddenly died, and Susan brought the children back to Omaha, and by all accounts lived a pretty decent life. I think she inherited some money from Timothy, and the 1930 census shows them living at a pretty good address in Omaha with a live-in chauffeur. Anyway, so I've only identified a handful of the people. I have them all numbered, so if anyone is doing additional research, I would really appreciate helping me fill in the numbers. Anyway, thank you.